Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu.
Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu. In today's podcast, I am exploring the notion of society, democracy, and social media. And my guest is Songezo Zibi. And there are a lot of issues that we will be teasing out that concern the South African society in the main, but some of them have a universal ring. More interested in the character of South African society as it is evolving, and especially concerns about the fact that we are increasingly becoming an angry society. We're losing civility in our conversations. There's growing bullying on social media. Beyond that, there are things that affect society outside of social media that I would like us to also explore. Ethics, values, the character and the state of our well-being as a society. So the first place to start will be to look at where we are as a society. Welcome, Songezo.
I'm Zu.
Great. Perhaps we could start off by characterizing the state of our society. How would you characterize society? How would you paint the picture of social dynamics today?
Well, I don't know whether to start with angry or confused. I think the more accurate description is confused, strained, and basically breaking at the seams. And I think a lot of people are looking for answers as to why that is so. But also importantly, they're looking for solutions. And maybe what feeds some into that frustration and makes it worse is wanting things to be okay quickly.
Yeah.
And therefore you look for silver bullets because people are looking for stability, for a sense of normality, and to believe that this formula is working for them too. And I don't think that is there.
Yeah.
And as a result, society is going through this phase of extreme confusion and disaffection with most things, by the way.
Yeah, because I notice wherever you go, there seems to be bottled up anger, whether it's on the roads with road rages or a certain level of impatience in how people relate. And the social media, the way I say it at least is that it's a reflection of who we truly are when others are not looking. Yeah. Because there are these screens on social media. We think people are not seeing you as Mzu, you as Songezo, that they are just seeing words, you just throwing words. But actually you're revealing who you really are in real life when no one is peeping through. So you are allowing them unwittingly to peep through the window. How would you say, social media has helped or contributed to amplifying the real social dynamics?
I think, first of all, social media has been a very good development. I think for enriching discourse, for giving people who haven't had a voice before the opportunity to be heard. I trek to my village every now and again, as I'm sure you go to your relative's village.
Yeah.
And you just see the difference between people who have the means to communicate and make their voices heard and those who do not. Now, those who can say something on Twitter, tag a radio host, and that makes onto national radio. If you are in a village and you do not have access to these instruments, or you do not have a smartphone, or you cannot converse in the language of Twitter or Facebook, it becomes that much more difficult, which means you don't exist. You are there, but you are unseen. So to that extent, it has been a really good development. But within that, we must also be mindful of the fact that those with access to these instruments and those who are able to use them are still not the majority. So you still have a lot of people that remain unseen. And you can have a situation where there is an elite of the technologically enabled.
Yes.
Who are able to overwhelm still the majority who do not have access to these instruments. Because, we're a country of 55 million people. Between Facebook and Twitter, far less than half the population are active on both platforms, which means you still have a lot of people who are not being heard. Yeah. Having said that, we have a lot more people now who are being heard than you did before. So there has been the positive, which is the democratization of discourse. However, it is still a strange discourse.
Yeah.
Or an unnatural discourse, in the sense that people go there not necessarily looking for discourse genuinely. They're actually looking to ventilate.
Yeah.
They're looking for confirmation biases. And the people that they tend to follow on Twitter are the people that they think they agree with.
Yeah.
The people that we befriend on Facebook are the people that we think you see them saying something that you agree with, and you think, oh, I think this is somebody I should follow. Or on Twitter, and therefore you follow them. So what also happens then is that the discourse gets distorted in that way, because people start to think that the country thinks the following. No, the people that you agree with that are on your timeline think the following.
Yeah.
And that's just speaking of the Twitter population.
Yeah.
You're not even talking about the people who are not on that platform and so on. What is really needed, I think, more than anything, is an awareness that these are still very specific spaces in which one has a conversation about any other thing. But the challenge we now have is that those who've been socialized into the ways of social media have also learned a disturbing type of discourse, some of them, which is there is no accountability. There's nobody to get upset with you right here if you say something that is vulgar and hold you accountable right here. Right?
Yeah.
And so the distance makes people feel that they can say any and everyone is brave. Everybody's a warrior on Twitter because, well, I can say it was going to happen. I'm never going to see this guy.
Yeah, just there, as there are a lot of things that you've said, but some bring to mind, especially on the character of our discourse, the breakdown of civility that we see on social media and Twitter in particular. I remember when I was growing up as a young boy in Langa Township, and there was a very popular radio station amongst a certain community of people, the Xhosa-speaking community. And I think back then it was called Radio Xhosa. And there were discussion platforms, especially from midnight. And there were people who were regular features, and you could say that they were leaders in this platform, in this discussion platform. But conversations were very civil. People disagreed. I mean, there was a segment where people could pass on greetings to another and they celebrate each other. But also there was a dimension of debate, of exploring a social issue, which suggests to me that people want to debate, want to their views, their opinions about many things in society, but you could have those discussions in very civil way, in a very, even if you disagree, but you can disagree in a civil way. It would seem to me that the age of social media and Twitter in particular has generated or opened up the worst of, they've opened up spaces for expression of the worst of our humanity. Why is that so? Where could we trace the causes of this toxic way of interacting?
I think the toxicity is almost unique to Twitter because it's not the only social platform. And I think all of us have seen someone tweeting that Twitter never used to be like this. And they will reminisce about whenever I joined Twitter in 2010. And people reminisce about 2009 and 2010, 11, 12, and so on, when Twitter was more civil. And I put it down to the following, and I'll draw later a comparison with Facebook. I put it down to the following, and that is, over time, we've trained the brain to operate within a limited accountability landscape, which is Twitter. So if you look at Facebook has a lot more biographical information about any of the users on that platform.
Yeah.
It will talk about, so you have to say, well, you don't have to, but people share where they work. They know whether you are married or not and whether you are related to another person because of one or other thing. So your entire accountability relationship structure is there. And therefore, if you say something vulgar or you do something that is violent in Outlook, there are a few other people who are going to hold you to account or that you can be reported with implicitly that Mzu is not using this language. Twitter is a different space. You can be just yourself, just a first name, or a fictitious name with not a picture of yourself, and you can create a completely non-existent persona, and there is no accountability. That is the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is that the platform itself does not provide room for proper expounding of views. In other words, you can string out your argument. You've seen on Facebook, some people write fairly long posts, but that's because you can lay out a proper argument on Facebook. And you find that people generally engage in a more meaningful way than they do on Twitter. And that's because of the architecture of Twitter and how it forces people to behave. So over time, I think our brains have been trained to operate in a cyber version of the Wild West, where anything goes, and people feel that they actually have a right to say and do anything. The other time I was at Brooklyn Mall. The next thing I saw a tweet, somebody reporting on Twitter that they'd seen me at Brooklyn Mall.
Yeah.
Why? Who does that? Why would you do that? Why are you telling your friends that you've seen me at Brooklyn Mall? What do I have to do with them? But as you can see, the perceptions of private spaces and privacy are collapsing.
Yeah, just on that, there's you've made a point about the architecture of Twitter as feeding this toxic culture that you see in conversation. But it could also just be that we're trying to use Twitter for what it was never meant for. Because I remember in the early days of Twitter, I only came, I think, around 2010 as well. This was a platform driven by and large by reporters, by editors, by people in the media space to simply drive news, to share news, to share information, to complement the analog platform of sharing, that is print media or broadcast media. So it gets quicker to the consumers of news, and it has evolved to be a microblog of sort. I think that's where the problem began, where we tried to make it a microblog, to try to push views, to try to be experts in areas that we're not experts in, even if we're experts in those areas, but to push expertise using a wrong platform. And I remember that there were two cases recently, and these are not related to South Africa. And one was, I think, at the beginning of this year or late last year, it was Ta-Nehisi Coates, who had been harassed on Twitter or bullied on Twitter by Cornel West for the piece that he had done. I think that piece appeared on the Guardian. And Coates decided that this is not a platform for him. He felt bullied. He said he was not on Twitter for this. I think he found a toxic moment at the time. And more recently, I think last week, there was a case of the New York Times journalist, Maggie Haberman, who slammed the platform for being toxic and announced that she's scaling down on Twitter. Yet these are the people who had, who were at the forefront of driving news on Twitter. If these individuals are stepping back from Twitter, that tells you that something has broken in that platform, or something has happened that is no longer healthy in that platform. Even in South Africa, I have friends who are leading opinion makers who are starting to ask why they should be on Twitter, given this uncontrolled wave of bullying day in, day out, hour in, hour out, minute in, minute out. Could it be that maybe we should rethink how Twitter is used, not as a microblog, perhaps back to its original intent, where you just share information and get out?
The genie is out of the bag. You can't, out of the bottle. You can't put it back now. It's too late. Now, I'll pose a different question on exactly the same thing, and that is when there is something that makes us deliriously happy.
Yeah.
Such as when Luvo Manyonga wins the Olympic gold medal.
Yes.
The conversation on Twitter is enormously positive and affirming, and you find very few people who have toxic things to say.
Yeah.
Because we are in this moment. So I believe, And I haven't done the research, but it is a perception that I have that what is also happening, the toxicity that you see on Twitter also has to do with the strains people are feeling in real life within society, right? Now, a lot of things are not going well. And whether, we like to admit it or not, they're not going well. So let us think of the things that give joy to life, that give meaning to life. And let's think back about the years we all love to hate now, which is the mid to late 1990s and the early 2000s. Now, the Springboks were doing very well in rugby. We won the World Cup. Yeah. And on successive World Cups, we did well. We won the African Nations Cup. We started to routinely qualify for the Nations Cup and the World Cup. We went to the World Cup in France in 98. We went to the World Cup in Korea in 2002. We missed out on qualification for the World Cup in Germany by a whisker. But over time, though, things have been degenerating. Yeah. Then you have a cricket team who choke. Now, it's always interesting that when people feel a profound sense of disappointment, the level of toxicity goes up.
Yes.
On Twitter, because people are bitterly unhappy about one or other thing. And I think some of that toxicity is also a reflection of how across different and various spheres in society, perhaps we feel that things are not working. And therefore, we feel the need to lash out. Yeah. You see the same version of it, by the way, on Facebook, but it's not as bad as it is on Twitter because of the architectural issues. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe we need to probe deeper. Deeper than just a platform and say, but what is it? If we were fundamentally happy in general, would you see the kind of toxicity that you see on Twitter? Yeah. I don't think so. I think it's a symptom of something that is of a society that is unwell.
We'll come back to this idea. I'd like to delve into it a little bit, but perhaps to just shift the focus slightly to look at democracy and how the digital instruments and platforms potentially are a powerful complement to democracy. And that what we've seen is democratization of Twitter. If you think of an image of the crowds, really, of the masses, of a large swathe of people who were outside of these digital platforms. Now these are now available in their hands. They have access to these. And you had in the past a situation where print media and broadcast media had gatekeepers, editors. A reporter is someone who has a job as a journalist, a reporter. Anyone now can report. You are on Gautrain, an incident happens. For good or for worse, you could take out your phone and put on the video and record that and send it on social media. There have been worse forms of this when people record, individuals that are beaten to death or stabbed to death or burned to death and share this on social media. But by and large, it has kind of massified news reporting or news analysis. And this is a quality of democracy. And we see democracy for both its merits and its demerits. What can we learn from all of this in terms of enriching democracy?
I think the lesson that we learn is that everything has got its limits, whether it is technical limits or it is moral limits, actually. And I was an editor at some point in my life, and I found Twitter enormously useful. For two reasons. The first, as you said earlier on, we could disseminate the news. The second is to give you a specific example. In the afternoons, when we were deciding what's going to go into the newspaper the next day, I had TweetDeck in front of me. And sometimes updates to the stories we're working on would break on Twitter.
Yes.
So you knew that the story that you're working on is no longer relevant. You need to update it. And so there is a complementarity between journalism and the availability of platforms like Twitter to so many people, because you can work with it. But everything has limits. And so in the same way that I made the example about the fellow who just decided to tell the whole world that he's just seen me, and there are more gratuitous forms of this that go into people's private lives and so on. Here's the thing about journalism, for instance, and the gatekeeping that happens. There are rules there.
Yeah.
About what you can, how you accuse someone of anything. And if you don't follow those rules, you get held accountable. You get embarrassed as a professional in that you have to print an apology. You can get sued and so on.
Yeah.
On Twitter, what's happened is that people have tested the boundaries. So they first applied the traditional boundaries of discourse to Twitter. And that's when people found Twitter to be a useful and civil platform.
Yes.
But the more they tested the boundaries, they realized, hang on, I can actually just say stuff. I can actually just do stuff. I can share things without any consequence. Hell, I can be anonymous and so on. And part of that has had the effect of introducing a normal that is outside what we've considered to be normative. And that normality has tended to be vulgar sometimes. And I believe it is in that space where even the positive impact on democracy has potentially started to be negative.
Yeah.
Because there is no proper discussion, the opportunity for discernment diminishes a great deal. And people just chase confirmation biases. So you have people saying, oh, the petrol price is rising because the president had interest in the energy business. Nobody offers any evidence, but our minds have now been trained to accept things our brains previously would have had the muscle to question without question. So the quality of the discourse on Twitter is now exceptionally poor to the extent that the outcomes that you would get out of the instruments of democracy may be negative and detrimental to the democracy itself.
You could be very well accused that saying this is the quality is now poor, you're casting aspersion on the character of the quality because it doesn't suit your particular interests in terms of where you are, say, in the social strata and what you'd prefer to be discussed on Twitter and how it should be discussed. You could be accused of trying to apply rules that you were once comfortable with, say, as an editor.
Yes.
Now you've lost all control. Now referring to people who are actually editors or they are journalists, that their knowledge is contested, of course, by people who may not have similar expertise, but the content of the discourse that they're trying to bring is seen by some as astute and as fashioned in line with their own interests, and that has to be contested. So some would argue that we should contest those who hail from the age of media as cloistered spaces that only delivers information to us, delivers breaking news to us. What would be your take on that?
In fact, I would say the news media itself is not immune from this kind of degeneration, by the way. So
actually, I had that question.
It's not something that is unique to the non-news media users. In fact, journalism has been degrading for quite some time.
Yeah.
Partly because, remember, journalists produce content for whose quality increasingly reflects
the state of society.
The state of society. And journalism is in an exceptionally poor space itself.
Yeah. Why is that? I mean, there was, I think, the New York Times and various other news media have fallen into this rush to outcompete others to announce breaking news or to report stories that turn out to be fake news.
Without properly checking them, without properly checking stories.
Let's talk about fake news and how journalism has degenerated as part of this discourse on the erosion of standards in media.
This is how. I still believe that it's got to do with the contours in the brain that get formed out of habit. And you subconsciously slip into a certain way of doing things, and there are echo chambers. So I'll use a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Journalists very easily fall into the trap of sloganeering themselves. So you find that even though they've written an article, it is a slogan itself.
Yeah.
The article speaks to a particular slogan. So the frame of interpretation of the data has already been set by a particular slogan or a particular outlook. Now, it used to be ideological. It's dropping to the extent where it's got to do with the echo chambers that you get on social media, basically.
Yeah.
So how many times have you seen a whole article that talks about what Twitter says? But the what Twitter says is premised on an article that did not have a lot of insight on its own and background. So you create this echo chamber where somebody has written an article which is not particularly substantive. Twitter reacts, and then there's an article about what Twitter says. Yeah. And then Twitter reacts to that article about what Twitter says. And you're moving around in a circle with nothing new, no additional insight. So the media is not immune.
One of the things I found quite strange is when media, that is print media, and even broadcast media, television, would start flighting tweets,
of course,
as part of news reporting.
Yes.
And I found that quite strange. I don't know. I mean, how would you locate it in this debate, discussion?
It's not strange. I can understand why they do it. And without talking about in my time, when I was a journalist, but
that would have never happened in my time.
No. It's not even that. So one of the things that we tried to do was we know what the limitations of social media are.
Yeah.
Which means we are going to go and get the backstory that nobody has. And we're going to keep informing that discourse in that way.
Yes.
And that is, we need to explain why things happen, not just what happened, but why it happened in one way and not the other way. Why am I seeing the picture that I'm seeing? That is something that you will almost not get in any meaningful volume on any social media platform. And I believed that is the best way to influence the discourse on social media, because if you try and chase the breaking story, you are almost certainly going to lose. Let me give you a practical example. How many times have you seen a video clip on Twitter of somebody apparently falling into peril, like maybe they died, they fell over a cliff, but you don't know what happened?
Yeah.
You wonder, so what happened? The person who posted the video is not responding. Nobody knows what happened. And now you don't know, right? There is still a space for journalism, therefore, because telling the story of, but what really happened to that person? Why were they there?
What the context? Because there's richness in the context.
Yeah, there's richness in the context.
It's gone. It doesn't exist now.
So the reason we fall into fake news is because we are chasing just the breaking story. And it's easy because for all manner of reasons, people fabricate incidents. They fabricate incidents of distress or happiness and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I without singing your praises, but I was quite aware of some of your methods, because you would share over coffee that, a story has to percolate over time, that there's no need to rush. And that forces you to follow substantive stories that are meaningful. And it's not just social media today where we're devoid of richness, lack of context, lack of nuance, but also newspapers. You could pick up, and I don't want to be overly critical, but I think generally, and it's a point that you've made very well, that overall there's been a decline in the quality of media, both social media and media as we know it. I just want to go back to the point that you touched on, which is the fact that there is an amplification through social media of the tempo of society, the angst of society, or the happiness of society. And I sometimes worry that what we find, or what we see through social media, is too abridged for us to understand exactly what is happening in our society today.
Yeah,
I mean, I go to, and this struck me recently when I went back to to see my relatives in Khayelitsha and listening to stories of who died, who was murdered, who went to jail, and how so-and-so couldn't get a job and fell into alcoholism, how drugs are being peddled, those kinds of stories that you hear, and they disturb you because you're living in these cloistered bubble places. And I don't find much of that coming to the fore. It seems that we are more engaged on narrow sort of debates or things that are reflective of our social status or class status or the little walls that we're in, and that we see symptoms. So we deal with symptoms on the media or in social media. How best can we understand social reality as is, the social dynamics as they really are, and how best to respond to what's happening in society beyond the limited spaces of social media?
I think that the first thing is to get off social media. And I don't mean leave it and shut it down, but I think recognizing that all you're ever going to get on social media are leads. Rather than the rich information that you need to get about anything. And it's not so difficult to migrate from social media onto radio. And you listen to either Sakina's show on SABC or you listen to UCBS on 702 and. I used to, not so long ago, I would get invited to Umhlobo Wenene. And I remember the last time I was on for 2.5 hours. And we were discussing state finances. The fiscal framework and fiscal ceilings and borrowing and so on. You would think that on Umhlobo Wenene at midnight, nobody would be interested in talking about this. But if the language is accessible and the information is presented in a way that the listenership can appreciate, you have a very rich discussion. And so I was supposed to be on for 30 minutes, then it became an hour, then it became an hour and a half. And then when we're going to 2 a.m., I said, listen, I gotta go to bed. But the way people speak, because they phone and they share an experience. They say, this happened to me. I've always wondered why this happens. Now I understand. Or explain to me, why do I get this? So the richness of the discourse, and people bring their own experiences to radio. So I think we also need to appreciate the rest of the platforms that we have. This podcast conversation that you and I are having, to the extent that a lot of people are going to log on to it, you begin to get a sense of what the rest of the country is living through. Otherwise, we limit ourselves to the soundbite. So I think awareness more than anything of what you can get on social media versus what is out there is the first step towards remedying this.
Awesome. Now I want to talk about the issues around, say, the rise of populism, because this coincides with the rise in populism, which we're beginning to kind of see in South Africa today, sort of a mob culture. There are people who have abrogated the right to shout on others and not to be shouted back at. They intimidate, they use tactics of intimidation in discourse, and they kind of diffuse this reign of terror in how we relate. It's not unique to South Africa, but there might be elements that are idiosyncratically South Africa. And if you look at the US currently, there's this reference of populist nationalists, and they are very impatient. They are very angry. And all these populists are one characteristic feature that is a common thread amongst them is anger. They always are very angry. They shout. So you have Donald Trump and
shouting at the Iranian president on Twitter in capital letters.
You see, and a whole army of supporters that adopt these unproductive ways of engaging. You could see it to a limited extent with pre-Brexit debates, anti-immigrant debates in Britain, much of Europe. I think Europe narrowly escaped the grip of populist nationalist parties. So you see this wave across the world. What explains this wave? I'm more interested in why is it allowed to continue in the way that it's continuing? And by using allow, I'm not suggesting in any way that it should be banned, but that why are people giving it oxygen? Why are they giving it life? Why are they giving it attention? 1. 2, what are the causes of this? What are the conditions in society? What is the human condition that gives rise to populism? Because I think it's dangerous for us to dismiss it as, these are signs of Hitler, these are signs of fascism emerging, sort of to throw labels at them without understanding the human condition that gives rise to this. What would be your take on this?
I think let's start with the second question and what causes it. So I believe that what causes it is anxiety about an environment in that people feel they no longer have influence and control.
Yeah.
And are finding it difficult to adapt to. That's the first reason. The second reason has to do with the degeneration of trust in institutions that gave stability to life. Because people trusted those institutions and they would function, they provided a certain level of normality and anchoring to what people were able to how people were able to live their lives. So let me start with the first. I think the biggest change that we are not recognizing is technology.
Yeah. It's a massive change, yeah.
Technology in its totality and how it is altering our very lives, how we live our lives every day. And therefore, how the constant adaptations we have to make every day are changing the way that we feel comfortable or uncomfortable about life. So I'll use two examples. The first is that we take it for granted, but it used to be that if somebody cannot get hold of you, they would phone you at home, phone you at the office, or send you a letter.
Yeah.
And that was that. Now people can get hold of you. But of course, that means you have to respond quickly because they can get hold of you, whether you are driving or... Mm-hmm. So there is no time when you cannot be contacted unless you choose to be uncontactable. Now, when you choose to be uncontactable, you set off a wave of panic because you now cannot be found and the phone has been off for 5 or 6 hours. Are you overseas? It just triggers a whole thing. So life has changed, but more in terms of the impact on society. And that is, I think, one of the threats that we kind of subconsciously feel is the sense that technology is taking over. It's taking over jobs. It is taking over functions. It is taking over a lot of things that we used to be able to do ourselves. And I think there is something to be said, or some sociological study that's got to be made about how we're coping with all of this, because the volume of information that we have to process and take a view on any given day is enormous.
It is.
Because of technology.
No, it is.
That is also where the quality of the interpretation and the discernment starts degrading, because you've got so much to process. And therefore, the quality of the decisions that you make is so much worse than it otherwise could have been, because there is literally no time to ponder over a decision before you have to make a decision. So there are varying impacts, whether it is in the job space or the quality of our decision making. So
you'd say that our ability to make good judgment has diminished as a result.
As a consequence, it has diminished. Also because we've learned to trust instruments that we perhaps shouldn't trust so much. So you see something on Twitter, you think it's fact. You go off and you tell someone else. So there is that side of thing. But at the same time, there is also the reality that society, the state or states and business, basically the institutions of power in society, have increasingly become difficult to influence.
Yeah.
They have taken over the democracy itself. So let's take the South African example and let's take the US example, right? In parallel, to show how this simply takes different forms depending on where you are. So if you look at state capture, in particular what we now know about the Gupta family and other parties, other people at a lower level, you realize that what you have are institutions that are supposedly democratic, but they serve interests that can be so narrow that you realize that the entire state architecture has been, and most of it has been hijacked for narrow interests. When people feel helpless, they are more likely to be angry.
Yeah.
And those in society who gain currency are those who are best at expressing a feeling of frustration and anger.
Yeah.
These are not necessarily the people with the most optimal solutions, but these are the people who are able to eloquently give words to the anger itself. What necessarily follows from that is a silver bullet. The formula is simple, and the reason why there are comparisons with fascism and Nazism is that the formula is enduring. It's simple. Having eloquently explained the problem.
You want to say rather it's simplistic.
You must now identify an enemy. Somebody caused this, which means the old instinct to look for a witch. So the theory of witchcraft comes into play. And you can't have a complicated, nuanced enemy. It's got to be an enemy that people can identify. Then you say, oh, but that is your enemy. If we violently deal with that enemy, and anybody who suggests that we need to think about this, we lump them together with that enemy and we destroy all of them and everything will be all right. That is as far as the thought goes. So the drivers of this feeling in society might be different to what they were in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah.
The method of populism
is similar,
is enduring, because essentially you are appealing to the same
base instincts.
In the general population. And that is why I feel that the populism is so much. How do we get out of this? I don't know. I think it needs to get worse, far worse, before it gets better.
I think we do need to think long and hard about how do we tackle the conditions that feed populism rather than to leave it as a label. And I think there are things in society that we are not caring enough to deal with, such as high levels of poverty, levels of social exclusions in places like your Diepsloot, your Alexandra, your Enkanini in Khayelitsha, your informal squatter settlements near Hermanas, your Imizamo Yethu near Hout Bay, or your Kayamnandi near Stellenbosch, or Orange Farm, many of these places that are below our radar in the various discussion platforms. There's something brewing there. And sadly, those who have an ear for these communities, for these cries, are those whose agenda is populist, whose agenda has nothing to do with creating long-term solutions that work for the South African society. They are more interested in mobilizing the crowds behind the mobs, behind their narrow agenda, this demagoguery, this new demagoguery associated with some of the parties. I think as society, we do need to think about proper strategies and also our conversations to reflect a sense of care about what the majority of the South African population are going through on a day-to-day basis. We may talk about the rise in fuel prices on social media or other things that we tend to be absorbed to, Cyril did this or didn't do that. But we do need to start elevating our level of conversations to talk about how do we mobilize collective energies to deal with these forces that may undermine social stability in future.
Look, what depresses me, Mzu, is that I think all of these are going to get worse.
Yeah.
I think they're all going to get worse, not because there are not enough people who care, because apart from the political populists who will hijack this, there are very many people who work for NGOs who live and fight for these communities every day, who could be in a privileged position with a job in the private sector, but they elect to fight the cause of those who are voiceless and do not have the kind of opportunities that the rest of us have. But here's my fear, and that is this fight against poverty and unemployment is almost unwinnable in the South African sense. Why do I say that? So let me go back to technology and other changes again. So just last week, so the things that we could rely on, and maybe I need to expand on this bit about institutions.
Yeah.
The things we used to rely on, such as people working in the mines.
Yeah.
Those opportunities are not there anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. The things we used to rely on, such as people working in the agri sector.
Yeah.
The reality is the technologies that are there now are such that you don't need 200 people carrying hose to till the land, right? Because there are pesticides and other things.
Mechanized now.
Mechanization, there are drones which tell you, all manner of things.
Yeah. So
the level of technological integration into the production system is such that there are still fewer opportunities.
Yeah.
So here's my fear. And that fear is virtually all the solutions we have to give people a sustainable living, because a job does more than give you an income.
Yeah.
It gives you a routine.
Correct. Yeah.
It gives you back your dignity.
Yeah.
It gives you a purpose and so on. Which are the things which form the pillars of a society that functions? Because there is a far greater sense of purpose and dignity that is shared by people. So think about, and you're an academic, think about what we are educating children from basic education all the way to tertiary. And you tell me, with the kind of physical and audio dexterity that technology now has, how many of those will find work in the new economy? Because that new economy is not going to wait for us. Unfortunately, whatever we feel.
Yeah, even before getting there, I looked at some stats, and of course, I've not been able to corroborate the stats, but it came from Symphonia South Africa's own research that showed that of the 25,000 schools that we have in South Africa, only 5,000 can be regarded as fully functional, as viable schools. That's 1 out of 5. Now, if we're thinking about economic progress, building national economic prosperity, making the economy to work, that surely is not the basis to achieve that. And of the kids that enroll at school, only half of the total reach matric, half drop out. We've not even spoken about those that successfully complete matric. So you have major problems at that layer. Even below that, you have problems to do with barriers to learning, where kids are growing up in social environments that are not conducive to success, where there are no role models, where learning is just not conducive, and there are no figures to want to emulate or to follow in life. And then you come to higher education. As you said, I'm an academic, I'm in higher education. I can tell you now that our education system has not kept up with the demands of a new economy. We simply are not ready. We're not producing, churning out graduates that can compete in the world. And then this is a self-critique. I'm not criticizing my colleagues or institutions that are out there. We've not thought hard about how to use existing institutions in society to drive modernity, to drive economic progress. The economy, there was a time when we were very impatient with anything that is below 5%. If we're growing at 3%, we would be sullen and very, very unhappy. Today, we're very happy just with 1.7%, which has been revised downwards even. So we're happy with anything that is not a negative. And I find that pervades all other spheres of our society, where we as long as we are not in the negative, whatever outcome is, we're happy with. We society that lacks drive, as you said, the trust factor in institutions has gone. There's no leadership encouraged to mobilize society towards a particular end. It's very difficult to communicate what is to be a South African, what kind of aspirations that we share collectively as a country. And now with all these things that we've explored, the human condition, impoverished townships or in rural areas, the state of the economy, the decline in mining, technology shifts in agriculture and in other sectors, it would seem that we will get back to the end state that you painted, that things will become very worse before they get better.
And then sometimes I have a fear that they may not get better. I mean, because one has to respond to these. Now, this is not like the 1800s when in Europe, part of industrialization, there are some who could then go across the Atlantic to the Americas, where their skills were still in vogue because there was nothing there and they could still be relevant. It gave them an opportunity at recovery. In our current situation, I wonder where the new world, the America would be, where you effectively have the opportunity to go backwards, to give yourself a chance to be relevant so that you can then prepare for the future. Yeah. But back to populism, not just here and in other countries. So in the US, they will blame immigration.
Yeah.
But actually, again, the big challenge there is technology more than anything, right? It's not that robots are yet taking their jobs, but I mean, for those who listen to this podcast, in the shops,
yes,
the aisles, there's a logic behind the aisles. And the logic behind the aisles is built for the trolley, as well as that little timber stand, I forget now what it's called, where the goods come in.
Yes.
From the back of the store. Okay? Now, artificial intelligence now allows that the machine that builds those platforms, it can build tiny little ones.
Yeah.
So that when you get to the shelf, you literally take out the old stock that was there and you put in the new stock. And you take the old stock to the back and it basically restocks it.
Yeah.
Right. If it's got a long expiry date and so on. But all of this is done by robotics.
Technology.
That improves the efficiency. But guess what it means? Somebody like my cousin Goodman, who's a packer, will no longer have a job. Now, there is also technology where you put all your things in a trolley and you walk out and it scans everything.
Yeah.
Which means
I've seen
cashier,
that.
You've seen that.
Yeah.
Your cashier and the packer. Now, so guess what happens? What happens is that once you are no longer able to respond to this, once again, you look for the human being who is the cause of all your problems. And you look around and say, hey, there's a Zimbabwean. That Zimbabwean should not be there. And it's hard for people to believe this, but just imagine if the law were to say our fellow African brothers and sisters qualify for promotion opportunities under affirmative action in the same way that South Africans do. All those Pan-African pretensions
would go away,
be exposed as fake.
Yeah.
Because suddenly your interest is
affected. Yeah.
And in political terms, what would you get? You'd find that you can say that a lot of black people have now shifted to the right wing.
Yeah. Which, by the way, arguably, we do have right wing amongst
right-wing tendencies. We just don't want to say we don't want to say we have them, right? We don't want to say we have them, and so we hardly look at the cause of the. We look for a human being, and we don't look at how we work on the solution. We look at how else can we remove the person who is a problem from the scene.
Yeah. Now I want to these are fascinating ideas. I hope we can have a second podcast to start moving the conversation a bit to some of the economic questions that you are raising now, and how the technology shifts away from social media, technology broadly, how these could affect social relations and how we think about society, how we think about fellow human beings, and so on. So I think that would be a worthwhile conversation to have down the line. But I have a last question for this podcast, which is, we've painted this largely grim picture, which is, I like it because it's an unsentimental, cold eye assessment of social reality. What are the challenges of leading during these times? What is the responsibility of leaders? And by leaders, I don't only refer to
across all spheres,
political leaders, business leaders, civic leaders, those who hold positions of responsibility in the media and in education, in higher education. What are all these realities portend or suggest? How should we think about leadership under these conditions? What is the challenge for leaders? What is the call for leaders today?
In three quick pillars. The first is honesty.
Yeah,
we tend to want to babysit each other's feelings, and not be honest about the gravity of the situation we're facing, whether it is poverty and inequality or it is the inability to adapt for the future.
Yeah.
I think we need to be honest with one another and be honest with the people we lead, those of us who are in leadership positions, about what the burning platform is. The poverty and inequality are symptoms of what?
Yeah.
We need to say what that is. So that is the first thing. The second thing is we really need to reestablish a relationship with the facts and the ability to analyze those facts to inform the decisions that we need to take about what to do about these problems that we have.
Yeah.
Sentiment, which speaks to the feeling that we're talking about and the anger, unfortunately, it doesn't help you become any more informed than you were at the beginning, which means you come up with a suboptimal solution. So the facts are important. The third is to lead with clarity of purpose.
Yeah.
Because we tend to kind of modify the purpose depending on how people feel about one or other thing, whether the sentiment is going in that direction or not. And I think those three things are what we need to start familiarizing ourselves with. Because I think over time, if people know that people in positions of leadership will always give them a relatively unvarnished view of what is going on, then we can grapple with the solution. But the facts are there. You're not going to try and pull wool over my eyes, because I think leaders try and pull wool over people's eyes, try and tell a good news story and so on. But on the ground, people know the anxieties they feel, and that the good news story they've been given doesn't make them feel better the next morning. May make them feel better maybe for a couple of days, but then they realize that nothing has changed. So I think those three things in combination are important if we are to start winning against the things we're talking about. And they're possible, by the way. They're not impossible. It just takes one person doing it.
Thanks, Songezo. I think this was really awesome. For those of you who would like to make suggestions on the future podcasts and the themes we could tackle and the guests, please write to us. My email address is at the write-up below the podcast. Until we chat again next time. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Perspectives with Mzu.